After e4, e5, knight c3, black can play bishop e4 straight away, and now white responds with knight d5. Now, we've seen something similar in the past, but we went through bishop a5 and bishop c5 setups and how to exploit them in our favor. Now, here let's go through a few other ideas, and then we can close this chapter once for all. a5 by black is an idea. Defend the bishop like that. I've encountered this a lot, and the rook will be on an open file right after. So knight to f3 comes now with an attack on this pawn. And obviously, the queen cannot defend the pawn in e5 in any way, so black is forced to play a move like d6. But now c3 comes, and the bishop has to move. So something we're gonna see something similar, kind of similar to previous scenarios. So let's make an example. Either the bishop moves or c6 to counterattack the knight. If the bishop moves to c5, d4, and now we threaten to win a free pawn. Well, we're attacking the bishop, but just in case you're wondering if the bishop should just move away, the thing is that we're threatening to win a pawn. So the black pawn in e5 has to take here, then you take back, and then the bishop goes to a7. Okay, now bishop g5. This cannot be stopped with the knight because you got double attack, and yes, maybe knight f6, and yes, maybe knight f6 could be an idea, but the knight is pinned, right? And so obviously you can exploit that in your favor. You have ideas like e5. So black in this position will have to play, let's say f6. Bishop d2 comes now by white. We have created a weakness. And now knight to e7 by black, trying to remove our unbelievable knights, is met with bishop to a5. So we took that. And after knight takes and pawn takes back, castle, it looks like the black player might be able to play a normal game, but you play bishop to e2, ready to castle. And white is much better here. Now you might wonder, black might play this move, bishop to d4, losing a pawn because you take back and then they take back. Neither of us has the bishop pair anymore, but now you play b4 and the rook will have to move. Obviously rook d5 is not an option because bishop c4 pins the rook, so rook back and now castle. It's a weird game. But white is ahead in development, and we will exploit that in our favor. Let's make an example. If black plays knight to d7, just the stupidest move possible, play knight e6, you're threatening a fork, right? So the knight shouldn't go there. If black plays b6 to develop from the fianchetto, rook to e1, rook to e8, and now queen to c2. We have much more space over the light squares compared to our opponent. We have this strength on the square e6 and c6. We're attacking it with the pawn and with the knight. And I don't think our opponent is going anywhere. Our position is much better. What about knight to a6? Okay, well, knight to c6, attacking a queen. Queen d7, and now bishop to d3. These are just sample moves. That the game can't really... That it's an open game. There's too many moves that can happen. But the point I'm trying to make is that once we out of the opening, straight after the move number 8, bishop g5, white is already in a much better position. And here we're going to look at bishop b7 because you might wonder, okay, what about protecting the pawn in h7? Well, okay, h6 is the best move according to the engine, but bishop g6 is coming anyway, and now we're going to force the rook to a trade, and we're completely winning, as you can tell. Unless rook goes to f8, but then, see, if rook f8, you play bishop to f5, and the queen is trapped. Well, you might say, okay, well, the queen doesn't seem to be trapped because she can go to f7, the only possible square. But now you play knight check, king moves, and now bishop to g6. So in this position, what if bishop to b7 try to counterplay? Here you just take the pawn, of course. King moves to h8, and now rook takes, bishop back to g6, attacking the rook. Again, rook to f8, you just play queen to c4 in this case. The idea is to go to h4. And there's no way to stop it. So let's take this from the start. So the early bishop before knight d5 and now a5. Fairly popular move. Knight f3, d6 protecting, okay, c3. And what if instead of bishop to c5, black counterattacks the knight, plays c6, okay. Now we take the bishop, pawn takes back, and now pawn takes back, we're up a pawn. The pawn structure is fine. Knight f6 developing d3. Weirdly, because we're locking in our light square bishop. Castle, bishop e2 developing. d5, best by black, obviously trying to open the center. Queen to c2. Bishop e6, developing. Looks like a fine game by black. However, the position is much better for white. We have the bishop pair. Knight to d7, developing. White continues with bishop to d2. Look, we're up a pawn, so it's not like it's not a type of line that really makes that much sense to go through, because you've got an advantage already, and you know how to punish it. Now, obviously, there's a million things that can happen. Here, let's make an example of how to exploit the position. So let's make an example. If black plays d4, this type of move looks like this bishop is now a little bit more active, and this bishop here now is more penalized. However, you just play knight g5, you're trapping your opponent bishop. You will take it, and it's the type of move you wanna make. You wanna take this bishop and double the pawn structure. That's what you wanna do. And even if the black rook goes to e8, for example, you still take it. And when the rook takes back, you haven't really damaged the pawn structure, but it's two knights against two bishops. Obviously, it's good to have the bishops, and the best move by white now is a4. Position evaluated +2, more than +2, obviously because of the extra pawn. And besides, we also have the bishop pair. So it's a type of line that is just completely faulty. And back a few moves ago, we went through the idea of d4, how to exploit that properly. What if black plays rook to c8, right? It looks like a completely normal move. Well, then knight to g5 does the same, and this is just better for white. So what if black plays, instead of the rook or instead of pushing the pawn, what if knight to b6, the idea of being able to move this bishop somewhere? Well, now white plays bishop to c3 and capitalizes on this pawn, winning another pawn, unless her opponent plays d4, which seems to be logical. But now bishop to d2 once again, and the weakness has been created. Knight g5 is going to happen. What if instead her opponent plays h6, stopping knight g5 and retaining this well-placed bishop? Well, you missed the part when we win a pawn. So what if instead black plays bishop to g4, pinning the knight? We can't really take this pawn now because the bishop will be taking the bishop for free. You play a4. And the best thing to do for black at this point is to remove the knight, which is the attacker of the square e5, so that black doesn't have to worry. You take back with the bishop, you complete this game easily. Again, position evaluated almost as white was up a piece. Let's make a brief mention of another line, but then we're going to change what we're looking at for a bit. So knight to d5 now, and instead of a5, what if black defends it with the knight? I've encountered this move a lot as well. Knight f3. Now you threaten to just take, and then you're putting pressure on the pawn in e5. So d6 by black seems to be making sense. c3. This was going to happen anyway. And after bishop to a5, let's look at this move. What to do here? Here, surprisingly, you do play d4, even though the pawn in c3 is pinned, so it's not even supported by a pawn. By the way, knight f6 now by black, putting pressure on the square e4 doesn't work because bishop g5 wins on the spot. I mean, that's just a great advantage, as you can tell. So let's not look at knight f6, but rather pawn takes in d4. Remember, this pawn is pinned. Well, fine, we have to take like this. And obviously taking with the knight is stupid, because when you're done taking back, you're going to be putting pressure on g7. Besides, you're also going to be threatening pressure. So let's make an example here. Here, you also have a threat of making this move. It's checking, it's attacking the bishop as well. And obviously the threat in g7. So what if our opponent plays knight g2 e7? At this point, just develops and challenges our strong knight. Knight takes. And when the knight takes back, b4, forcing the bishop to go to b6. And now a4, forcing black to open the a pawn. Let's say a5, for instance. Now we take this bishop. Pawn takes back, b5, attacks the knight. The knight has to move, let's say e5, bishop to a3. Puts pressure and capitalizes on the isolated pawn. Castle. At least black will have to try and do something with development. Bishop d6. Rook e8 seems interesting, but now you just take and you're completely winning. So even after take, and then take is not even possible because of the checkmate threat. So back in this position, we just took the knight in c6. What if our opponent takes us with the pawn and says, well, I'll attack your knight, and let's see how it goes. Because I need that knight to go away from the center. It's very powerful. Okay, knight takes, surprisingly. Queen takes back, but now queen a4 will finalize the attack on the opponent. I don't really see a way for black to stop us now, because if you make this check, you should be able to win the rook. So what to do? What about rook to, okay, rook to b8 is the best move according to the engine. And basically now we are going to take the bishop, yeah, but black has a check. And this initiative is not enough though, just there's nothing to really worry. It kind of feels scary, but you're actually okay. Bishop e3 blocks, castle by black, long castle. Doesn't look very good, but it is. Position evaluated almost +4 for a reason. So let's take it from the start and let's look at one more thing and then we will close this video. Bishop e4, knight d5, and now bishop to d6. This is also popular. Our opponent doesn't want to give up. And remember, look, if you were watching this video now and you're saying, oh, but why don't you go through bishop c5 and bishop a5? They make much more sense. Well, then you need to look at the other videos because I've already made them. Now I'm looking at sidelines so that we understand the Vienna all the time. And this move, by the way, happens a lot. So d4. Now how to respond? How can our opponent respond to this? So pawn takes in d4 seems to be making sense, and we're going to look at that. But first, let's look at this one: c6 attacking the knight. Now remember that the main reason why this move is bad is because it deprives the knight from the natural square c6. So now you just go back to c3, and after the pawn takes in d4, you take back, and now you're attacking this bishop, you're attacking the queen, and white is winning. What's our opponent going to do? He can't really stop you from going to g7. What if queen e7, then you play knight f3, you're threatening e5. I mean, you're threatening to first develop and then e5. This is a much better position. We're still threatening in g7. What if bishop to because you see, the playing black can't play knight f6 now because e5 is a strong move. And it's not like you can say, okay, the pawn is pinned. Well, then no, you will take in d6 with the queen, with the support of the pawn. So that's why e5 is a strong move. I know that the pawn is pinned, but the queen is not. If the bishop instead goes back to c7, then simply queen goes here to g7, and this is not the type of stuff you can come back, because queen to f6 now seems to be calming down the initiative, but now we're going to play bishop h6 as well. That means that, okay, if queen takes, then bishop takes back, and we have an attack on the rook, and the rook is trapped. The knight cannot take the bishop because then you will win the queen. The queen cannot take the bishop because then you will take the rook. So well, I mean, there's nothing here. Position is completely winning. It's already over. So if we just take it from the start, just in case it looked a little bit messy, but it's very easy. Knight to d5, bishop to d6, okay, d4. We look at the variation with c6. Go back to c3. And if they take, queen takes back with that attack on the pawn. What if queen to f6? Okay, queen to d3. This is not one of those situations where we are calming down our initiative because we're completely winning already. Knight to e7 now, developing. Knight f. So if black now castles, you can play bishop g5. The queen will have to move. If queen goes to g6, right? Because what else? I mean, either way, she's going to end up in e6. So queen to g6, you play h4. And obviously the idea is to play h5 and the queen is in huge trouble. Queen e6, knight d4 should be the end of the game very soon. So what if, okay, if f6 to counterattack the bishop, that doesn't work because you will take the bishop first. Black takes your bishop, but then you take this hanging knight in e7. So f6 doesn't work, loses a piece. What about h6? Okay, h5, attack the queen. The queen can't take the bishop because of the knight. Therefore, the queen will have to move, get passive. And the queen will also have to stick around the bishop in d6, because then we will take it for free. Although you might say in this position, what if the queen goes to h7? No, because you take the bishop, they take your bishop, but then you take the knight. Remember, there's also a weak knight here. So queen to e6 is the only move. Knight to d4. And now the queen will have to move. The only move will be queen to g4. And now bishop to h4 saves the bishop. And position is amazing for us. If queen takes the pawn in h5, looks like an interesting move because you can't really take this knight since the queen will take the rook. However, you actually can, because you do take the knight and then you give up the rook. But you take here, you're still attacking the rook. The rook will have to move. And then you just castle. Absolutely dominant position. Besides, in this position early, instead of queen taking the pawn in h5, let's not forget that the plan is bishop e2 and the queen is trapped unless she takes in g2, but now bishop f3 and we're winning. So back in this position, in order to avoid all the trouble, what if black, instead of castling, plays h6, stopping our bishop g5 idea, and the queen is now more secure in the f6 square. Okay, bishop e3 comes now, and after castle, bishop e2. Now, what you need to not forget is that the black play is not developed, and c6 square is taken by a pawn, which is annoying for black. Black knight going to a6 seems interesting. You're going to b4 maybe. Now, obviously, castle long, and now knight b4 is not a problem because you're going to be taking the bishop. It's got double attack on it. And even after castling long, what if instead of knight b4, bishop goes back to c7, and with the idea of playing maybe d5 later, a3 stops knight b4 from coming. We really don't want the knight to come there to that square, considering that now we don't have that attack on the bishop. Rook to d8, preparing d5, g4 by white. Obviously, we're going to attack on the opponent king side. d5 by black. This looks like it's going to get wild, and it's the type of position that, if you were to ask me, it's really scary. It's one of those positions where I might think for half an hour and then end up playing the worst move. Rook h to g1. This is the best move. We're going to play g5. Our opponent is attacking on the center, you attack on the side. Pawn takes with a discovered attack on the queen. So obviously here now we take this piece, they take the rook, check. The bishop has to take back, and then you take back, check. The king has to move to this square, h7, knight to e4, and comes with an attack on the queen. Remember, if we only get to play like g5 and then the knight taken in g5 with check, it should be, it is a devastating attack. The queen now doesn't really have any option if you think about it, because if she goes to g6, then bishop d3 should end the game, because you're threatening double check. I mean, not really double check, obviously. Knight f6, but then the queen will not be able to take the knight, and you know, you make things up. And if instead the queen actually goes to e6, then even worse, knight e to g5 check, pawn takes, and then you can take back, and you take it from there. So let's take this from the start, and let's look at the other variation, the one where, okay, after this move, bishop b4, knight d5, bishop d6, we're looking at d4, and we're looking at c6, attacking the knight. The knight returns, and now pawn takes, queen takes back. So we're making a recap. After queen f6, queen d3, knight e7, knight f3, and castle, we play bishop g5, right? Earlier I forgot to mention this variation, which is the one where the queen goes immediately to e6. Still, you play knight to d4, queen to g6, h4. Do you see how basically you end up in the same situation? Rook to e8 by black. Let's look at this one. Castle. And after h6 by black, how to capitalize here? Knight to f5. We have now triple attack over this bishop and double attack over the knight in e7. This seems to be able to... Well, I mean, knight takes is wrong because pawn takes, you see, knight takes, and now there's an attack on the queen, there's also an attack on this bishop, a double attack on that bishop, so you're winning material. And so now the pawn is attacking the queen, but the queen is kind of trapped. I mean, yes, she can move, but... And so in this position, what to do? Queen h5, maybe you can say that black still has an attack on this bishop, but simply save the bishop. The attack on the bishop in d6 remains, so after the bishop moves to safety, bishop e2 ends the game. So in this position, after knight f5 was played, what if our opponent says, well, okay, let's take this bishop first. Okay, now we take this piece, and now we're equal in material. Rook to f8, saving the rook from the knight, but now pawn takes g5, surprisingly. Well, we're opening the h5. Queen takes with check, king b1, that's fine. Knight to g6 to stop our influence, because we want to play queen h3 and then go all the way up. Knight to g6, but now you play e5. Well, the knight cannot take the pawn because queen to h7, then you can go straight to h7. Knight to a6 by black, attacking, potentially threatening to attack our queen. Knight c goes to e4, attacking the opponent queen. Queen to g4, bishop to e2. Queen to e6, inevitably ending up in that square. Queen to g3. If black goes now to b4 with a threat here on a2, this doesn't work because bishop c4 wins for white, and you're also going to be able to take the knight when the queen is done moving, unless black pins it. But in that case, queen to h2 is an unstoppable mate. Queen h7, nothing stops it. What if rook to d8, giving some space to the king? But this also doesn't help. You're going to play f4 now, with the idea of playing f5. And here, earlier in this position, remember I looked at this move, knight to b4, with the idea of the queen going to a2. Obviously this is blocked by bishop to c4. What if instead the queen takes in e5? I forgot to mention this variation. Okay, queen to h3 with the usual threat on the h file. Rook to d8, bishop to c4. And it's exactly the same position, basically. The checkmate is happening, it's unstoppable. You will play here, okay, let's say black plays knight to c5 with the idea of going to e6. But like, you will just play now check here in f7. This is inevitable and it's going to be checkmate very soon. So what if instead our opponent plays rook to f8? Well, no, because then queen h7, right? So let's take this from the start and let's look at this line. Bishop, the bishop going back to d6 and now d4. So instead of c6, let's go through pawn takes. Okay, queen takes back. And now if black, okay, plays a normal move like developing the knight to f6. Now you just pin it, right? And this is already, you know, we're going to be able to double up and isolate our opponent pawns. Obviously, you might, you know, here instead of bishop g5, this move isn't really an effective fork because the black player can take the knight. Then you take, but it doesn't really work because then the knight can go back to f6. And so bishop g5 is the best move. So after bishop e7, surprisingly, we take this one. We're taking f6 with the bishop. Two ways to take back. If bishop takes back, e5. The bishop will have to move again, or maybe play c6. If black plays c6 to counterattack, this is completely lost already. Take the piece, they take the piece, but now queen to e5 check. The queen cannot block because of the checkmate, king f8, and now check again, mate next move. And in this position, after e5, what if the bishop simply retreats to e7? Okay, castle, castle. Looks like this is okay, but you just play h4 and now we're starting an attack on the opponent king side already. c6 to kick away the knight. As soon as that happens, well, I mean, if black plays knight to c6, queen to e4, this is the best move. And you'll see what's going to happen in a while. We got this bishop d3 threat and you know, position evaluated +2 already. But like, let's look at this c6 move. What to do in that case? Okay, take the bishop, queen takes back, and now knight to f3. c5 by black attacking the queen seems to be making sense. Queen to f4. Knight to c6 eventually comes. Looks like our opponent will be able to develop. But now h5, the idea of playing h6 obviously. So h6 by black, rook to d6. And this is beautiful. If black plays, okay, well, what is there to play? Rook to e8, finalizing the pressure over the square. e5, simply bishop to c4. And you're attacking, you're putting a lot of pressure over the opponent king side. Obviously, the knight cannot take in the pawn in e5. It looks like a free pawn, but it's not, because when you take back and the queen takes back, then the queen and the bishop will have cooperation on the square f7. The queen in e7 cannot abandon f7, so that's not possible. Knight to d8 with the idea of going to e6. Queen to f5 is a beautiful move, because now after knight e6, for instance, rook to h3. G6 or any such a move was not possible. Obviously, you will just take. So rook h3, and after b5, this could be an idea to remove the bishop from that square so that our opponent can, you know, play bishop b7. B5 is a thematic move. Bishop to b7 develop, and then the rook on b8. These are like the kind of moves you might have to play when you're really backwards in development, like the black player is. You play bishop to d3. You're threatening to go to h7, checkmate in 2, right? So bishop b7 will not be possible. The game is completely compromised. What if after this move, after rook h3, our opponent doesn't play b5, but rather plays knight to d4 with an attack on the queen? Okay, take rook to h6, and you can take it from there. You're attacking h7. The pawn cannot take the rook because queen to g6 is a checkmate very soon. So let's do the last recap, and then we can close this forever. Knight to d5, bishop d6, d4. Look, I'm trying to make a recording from home, and there's this guy with this very noisy motorbike. I don't know why someone in traffic has to keep accelerating on the handlebar or whatever that's called, even though you're sitting. Like, how stupid does someone have to be to do that? Anyway, honestly, it just pisses me off. So we're looking at the variation pawn takes in d4, queen takes, knight f6, pin it, and after the bishop goes to e7, take, pawn takes back. Let's look at this. Okay, because of this structure, because there's a pawn controlling e5 and g5, you don't want to play knight f3, but rather knight g2, e2, because then you can go to g3, and then you're gonna have two potential outposts in which you will not be attacked by a pawn. So two options here. Let's look at the c6, how to punish this. Okay, take the bishop, queen takes back, knight to g3, and after d5 by black, trying to, you know, attack the center of his long castle, and white is much better. We're going to inevitably win material, especially a central pawn. If this gets taken back, our opponent is in absolutely serious trouble. Can't castle anywhere that makes sense. Cannot castle on the queen side. It's going to take too long. So let's go back a couple of moves. So knight to c6 in this position instead of c6 looks like a normal move. Queen to c3. The queen was under attack. So d6 by black. Is this a normal game? No, because of this double isolated pawns. However, you might say maybe that's not enough of an advantage. No, because knight to g3, bishop to e6 now, developing long castle. And now what to do? If black plays queen to d7, in order to be able to castle long side, you will play bishop to b5 and it's game over. Because what's our opponent going to do? If black now castles, knight to b4, it makes it too easy. And it's not like our opponent, you know, you'll win quite, you know, a little bit slowly. You know, there's no win straight away, but it's a devastating position. Besides, you got a lot of attack over c6. If black takes the bishop, then you can take back with the pawn. And when the pawn goes to a6 attacking the bishop, you can take the knight, and the pawn comes with an attack on the queen. That means that the pawn in a6 will not be able to take the bishop. This is very basic. And here in this position, instead of castling or anything, what if our opponent just plays a6 straight away? Well, we take the knight. And obviously queen takes is really stupid, because after the trades, you can play knight c7, and then it's a fork on the king and rook. So black has to take back with the pawn. Knight takes now the bishop in e7, and obviously if you take the queen, then queen to c6 makes a fork, and you know you're gonna have to take with the king. But now knight to h5 capitalizes on the f6 pawn, or at least the f6 square. And a few moves ago, instead of queen d7 with the idea of castling long, none of that works. What if black plays this move? King to f8. This is interesting. Okay, knight to f5. And this is so much better already. Rook to g8 by black, putting the rook on an open file, doesn't work because knight takes in e7. And if the bishop takes our knight, then you just take back with the knight and you're saving material. And if instead our opponent recaptures the knight, but then knight takes in f6, and it's a great position, you will then proceed. If black will have to play rook g7 to protect the pawn in a7, then you will play f4. And look, position evaluated around +4, so we can close it there. And just look at the other variation where just a few moves ago the knight just landed in f5 instead of rook g8. What if the bishop takes the knight and says, you know what, my dear knight, I hate you from the bottom of my heart. I think we can all tell we agree with that feeling. Take the bishop back, and now this is a dominant position. There's nothing to do for our opponent now. Knight to e5 seems to be placing the knight in a nice square. Maybe c6, kicking away the knight, and then b5, a5, a4, and starting an attack like that, and hope that this king will last. However, f4 kicks the knight away, so that move is punished. Knight to g4 with the idea of going to f2. That's fine. Rook to e1. Double attack on this bishop. And the bishop's trapped, so we're going to close the line there. Knight f2 just doesn't do anything. You're going to take this bishop. The knight can't just go and take this rook, because you're infiltrating with the queen, and yeah, that's going to be it. The last line is the following. So here, after bishop d6, you play d4. What about when they take, you take back, and they play f6? Actually, this is just bad, but it's annoying. And because it's not easy to punish such a move unless you're an engine, it's annoying that it's a punishable move. You should be able to punish this move. And the main way to punish this move, this f6 move, is to play bishop c4, so that they don't castle anymore. That's it. So here the best move by white, according to the engine, is bishop f4, and obviously the reason is we want to take, double up, isolate these pawns. If they take, you take back. And it looks like black can just go on with development. Knight c6, queen to d2. Looks like one of those boring games, but actually d6, bishop to c4. The knight can't really attack our bishop, so the bishop is attacking this square, this diagonal is very important. A move like knight e5 is not a problem. You play bishop to b3. And now our opponent has to develop. But it's difficult because the black player lost the dark square bishop. This was a very important piece. Here, you can't really play bishop e6. You can't go anywhere here that makes any sense. So you can play f3 as well. So, what if queen to e7 with the idea of playing bishop e6 and trade with our unbelievable bishop? Here, obviously that's not possible right now because there's also a knight attacking. But anyway, queen to e7, knight g2, e2 comes. And after g5 kicking away our knight, you will play knight to d5 attacking the queen. And so this doesn't get any good now. It's a horrible position. Queen to g7, needs to keep an eye on the square c7. Long castle, position evaluated plus 350 for a reason. So what if c6 attacking the knight? Knight to e3. There's this very good square f5, and we don't care if they take, because then we take back, and the king is on an open file, and this is actually a very, very, very nice position to play. So by the way, in this position after bishop c4, we mentioned how knight e5 is not good. What if black goes on with development? Knight g2 e7. Still, knight g2 e2. Remember, when black has a pawn in f6, you'd rather play the knight to e2 rather than f3. Because f3 is when black has a pawn in e5 that makes sense to play. You know, just stating the obvious. Knight to e5, attacking the bishop, bishop to b3. So this is just not going to work. The idea here that I'm trying to mention is c5, c4. Or maybe simply, well, see, the thing is you can't play bishop d7 because then you can't move the queen anymore and you can't castle. You just cannot. Let's try to mention this idea. Let's mention this one. Knight f7. The idea is to castle. Looks, you know, crazy, but it makes sense. I mean, you could think of doing it. Okay, well, knight to d4. And now after castle, obviously the square e6 is amazing, but there's a bishop defending that. You know, the point is that we had two knights attacking that square, and this is something you completely missed, didn't you? So one last mention, instead of knight f7 with the idea of being able to castle, what if c5? This seems to be making sense. Allows the development of the queen somewhere on the dark diagonal, development of the bishop, potentially even castle, or very simply just maybe leave the king in the center, although it's horrible, and then just you know, play maybe pawn to c4, and once the pawn has gone to c4, then you don't have this diagonal anymore, and the king can castle long. Don't worry, because you can play knight e6, and if the bishop takes, and you can take back, and things are kind of stable like that. If the queen moves, just to save the queen from the attack, then you can play knight g7 check, and then go back to f5. You're completely winning in this position. It's a fantastic position, unless your opponent goes to f8, in which case, okay, take, and then king f8, knight to h5, and you're attacking this pawn with an attack on the queen, so c4 doesn't really trap our pieces. Also, you know, you got queen to h6 potentially coming. And in this position, after knight e6, what if the bishop takes? Okay, take back, and now looks like knight f7 might allow our the opponent to castle, and we let them, because after castle, long, and castling, we're gonna win a pawn, and that's a crucial advantage at this point. Position evaluated plus 3. Black is not just a pawn down, but it's just passive and unable to take the game from now on.